Last time we talked about the presidency of Washington, so we're going to move on now and talk about our second president, who was John Adams. And before we get into things here, just a quick little introductory video on John Adams, and then we'll continue.
Children should be educated and instructed in the principles of freedom. Do you have an appointment? I'm a very busy man. Oh, it's you. Yes, come in. Come on in and sit down. You want to get to know me, don't you? I'm John Adams, the second President of the United States of America from 1797 to 1801. I played an important role in the American Revolution. I'm known as one of the founding fathers of America because my ideas helped shape the new nation. I wasn't the most popular president. People thought I was cranky a lot of the time, arrogant, short-tempered, and thought a lot of myself. But I had many good qualities too. My friends, the people I worked with, and even my enemies, always respected my honesty, my intelligence, my generosity, and my courage. Nothing could stop me from fighting for freedom and American independence. Huzzah! Hooray! Let me tell you about my childhood. It wasn't easy like yours. I was born in 1735 in Braintree, Massachusetts. Today, the city of Braintree is known as Quincy. I grew up on my parents' farm with my father, my grandfather, and my grandfather's father had all been farmers. My parents always believed in the importance of education.
A little book learning goes a long way.
Okay, so really what's important to know is when Adams becomes president, political parties begin to emerge for the first time. So after Washington retires, there's an election in 1796. It wasn't like before with Washington, it was kind of a landslide. Everybody wanted Washington to win. This time there were two candidates that had a legitimate reason to want to be president, and they were different reasons. So the Federalists, right, select John Adams as their candidate. Democratic Republicans select Thomas Jefferson. These two political parties have very different ideals, right? They both believe in many different things, much like the political parties of today. So Federalists, right, most of their supporters come from the North. They believe in a strong federal government, an alliance with Great Britain. Now, a lot of people say, why on earth would you want to ally yourself with a country that we just won a war against? Well, really, it was because the British, were the biggest trading partners of ours. They also, were the most powerful country in the world, and don't we want them as our friend? They believe in rule more by the wealthy, right? The better educated, that kind of thing. They believed in more of a loose interpretation of the Constitution, right? Maybe you could, look around things a little bit, how are you going to really let this control the government, right? A little looser was okay in their eyes. And they also wanted one national bank, right? Not once for every state, but one national one. It would make business between the states much easier. Democratic Republicans, they really had a lot of their supporters in the South. They believed more in strong state governments. They wanted an alliance with the French. They were our allies in the Revolutionary War, so why shouldn't we be friends with them now? They wanted more rule by the common man, everyday people. They had a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Whatever the Constitution says, that's what we need to. That's how we need to run the government. And they believed in smaller state banks to control government and people's money. Now, a lot of times, guys, kids want to kind of compare these to today's political parties, and really, you can't. You could make some connections, but for the most part, they're too different, right? Issues are not even close to the same then as they are now. So it's kind of hard to place, today it would be this, today it would be that. So I wouldn't worry too much about trying to figure that part out. Okay, so Adams wins this election of 1796, but he wins just barely. And if you can see this map, right, it's a very north-south kind of split. And the pie chart shows that 49% went to Jefferson, 51% went to Adams. So Jefferson becomes the vice president, right? Because he was the second place finisher. So you had the president and the vice president from two different political parties. Of vice president and president, there were actually bitter political enemies. So Adams takes office and begins to make many controversial decisions. Now, quickly, let's sort these, right? Obviously, Northerners, right, goes to Federalists, and Southerners would go to Democratic Republicans. A British alliance is Federalist, and a French alliance would be Democratic Republican. Support rule by the common man, Democratic Republican. Support of the wealthy, right, that would have been more of a Federalist ideal. Strong national government is Federalist. A strong state government would have been Democratic Republican. National banks was more of an ideal for the Federalists. State banks were more of an ideal for Democratic Republicans. A strict interpretation of the Constitution was for Democratic Republicans, and a loose interpretation was for the Federalists. All right, so the first controversial thing that happens during Adams' presidency is this thing known as the Xyz Affair. So the Xyz Affair starts in 1793. It says that France and Britain go to war, right? France and Britain have been going to war for centuries. So they go to war again. While this is happening, tensions kind of increase between the U.S. and France. France accuses the U.S. of secretly supporting Great Britain, and they're sort of right. So at the risk of having France turn against the United States, right, Adams gets nervous and he sends some peacemakers over to France to try to strike up a deal, because we don't want to anger the French. So France refuses to meet with the U.S. delegates, and instead the French agents, who are nicknamed Agent X, Y, and Z, demand bribes from the three U.S. officials. So they said, we're not going to meet with you, but maybe if you give us some money, right, then maybe we'll meet with you. Okay, so these shady French diplomats were nicknamed Agents X, Y, and Z, which is why we get the name XYZ Affair. When the U.S. rejected the bribes, an undeclared small naval war broke out that lasted for about 2 years. When Adams signed the peace treaty in 1800, it angered members of his own party. Remember, the Federalists wanted a British alliance, and this was tension that was happening with France. And so a lot of Federalists welcomed this. But Adams was smart and realized we don't want to make any major world power angry at us when we're such a new little country. Another video.
Angry at U.S. neutrality in the British-French conflict, the French had attacked a number of American ships. It was a big problem for President John Adams. The French keep attacking American ships. What shall I do? I must send smart diplomats to negotiate with French Foreign Minister Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Perigord. We are pretty smart diplomats. We want to negotiate service to France. My dream has come true. Surely Charles Digby, John Marshall, and Elbridge Gerry will successfully negotiate. Well, what are you waiting for? Get to work. Consider all the progress. This is cool. You've been like diplomats. Here come the foreign ministers from Presidency. Most report to Bill as X, Y, and Z. So you want us to leave your ships alone? Yes, we do. How much? I'd say pretty much. Enough to offer us a ride. Now, friends is a powerful country, you better pay. Grab a fight, an expensive war, then pay you some stupid crime. We say millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. You'll be sorry. When Americans got word of how disrespectfully they'd been treated by the French, many wanted to go to war. George Washington was ready to come out and retire to lead the army. Adams, however, tried further negotiation, and this time, France treated America seriously. The Xyz Affair, so named because that's how Americans referred to the French representatives who demanded a bribe, showed the world that the United States demanded to be treated with respect.
Okay, so that's kind of a goofy little video, but I think it kind of reiterates this kind of confusing diplomatic crisis. So, which term does not deal with the XYZ affair? Bribes, spies, diplomats, or war? Okay, the answer here is obviously B. It does deal with bribes, it does deal with diplomats, it does deal with a small undeclared naval war, but what it doesn't really refer to is spies. Okay, so the Alien and Sedition Acts. This is the other big kind of thing that happens with John Adams during his presidency. Probably remember pretty much as a mistake. So many immigrants, also called aliens, who entered the country illegally voted Democratic Republican, which Adams felt was a huge political disadvantage for him. So he created the Alien Act. The Alien Act gave the president broad powers over immigrants entering the country, right? Limited the number of immigrants, extended the amount of time it took for someone to become a citizen and therefore could vote, right? It was really kind of it was kind of him overstepping his authority, right? Giving him all these broad powers over immigration. Democratic Republicans were very outspoken of their criticism of Adams, and he was also outraged by this. So this led him to pass the Sedition Act, which was even more damaging to his credibility. The Sedition Act made it a crime for newspaper editors, writers, or speakers to criticize the government. Now, if this sounds like it's violating the First Amendment, well, it sort of does violate the First Amendment, which is why the Sedition Act becomes incredibly unpopular and causes all kinds of negative reaction towards the Adams presidency. So, Adams' legacy. Adams' presidency is plagued with controversy and scandal. He became increasingly unpopular and stood little chance of re-election in 1800. Unfortunately, Adams is also forgotten in the shadow of Washington and Jefferson. You know, you go to Washington, D.C., there's a giant Washington Memorial, there's a big Jefferson Memorial. Where's the Adams Memorial? You know, it's not there. So really you see that, you know, he kind of gets lost in the shadow of these other two presidents. But John Adams did a lot of significant things, mostly keeping us out of war with France and England. But he really is often forgotten about. Okay, what is the only person or group that would still have respected John Adams by the end of his presidency? Would it have been Thomas Jefferson? Would it have been some Federalists? Would it have been immigrants or newspaper editors? Obviously, the answer here is some Federalists, right? It doesn't even say all Federalists, because a lot of people in his own political party really started to dislike him by the end of his presidency. Okay, and this concludes, this video here will conclude our John Adams notes. So don't forget, after the video, make sure you are filling out your margins and your reflection.
When John Adams became president, it marked the first peaceful transition of power the United States and modern democracy had ever known. And that's ironic, because Adams was known as a hothead and kind of obnoxious, which made him just the guy to butt heads with France. France and England were at war, and American ships traveling to Europe were being attacked by the French. People in the United States were demanding a war, and the always argumentative Adams wouldn't give them one. He was the first president who faced the immediate threat of war and fought back with diplomacy. Unfortunately, his decision to resort to tough talk rather than tough actions made him unpopular with a lot of people in his own party. Still, history has been kind to our second president's actions during a crisis.
Stop and think if Adams had gone to war with France. First of all, there never would have been a Louisiana Purchase. The United States of America might very well end the Appalachians.
Hear that? Had we gone to war, some cowboys in Texas might be wearing 10-gallon berets.
Partner?
History has been a little less than kind to the Alien and Sedition Acts signed by Adams during the French crisis.
But John Adams was a brilliant man, but he could be hard-headed and blustery and just stubborn. And the Alien and Sedition Acts were 4 laws that essentially prevented people from criticizing the government. Well, the big problem with that is it's in violation of the First Amendment, of freedom of the press. And if you're gonna violate an amendment, don't violate the First Amendment. I mean, it's just so obviously wrong.
The acts were very unpopular with Adams' old friend Thomas Jefferson, who ran against him and helped our second president become our first one-term president. The two had feuded for a while. Adams was a Federalist who wanted a strong central government, while Jefferson insisted that power be held by the states. To simplify, Adams might have argued that only the federal government was strong enough to keep all the states in line. And Jefferson might have argued that what happens in Virginia stays in Virginia. He thought a too strong government might put America right back where it started. Adams, the first president to live in the White House, left after about 3 months, but not before writing these famous words about the building.
May none honest and wise men ever rule under this roof.
Whatever else may have been said about him, the words honest and wise certainly did apply to John Adams.